Hey you guys, how are you? Hello and welcome. I hope you're all doing really well. I have a beautiful plant here today that I've had in my care for quite some time that I'd just like to share with you guys because I've noticed that this year has kind of taken the market just by storm lately. I keep seeing this everywhere in plant shops and I keep on seeing it classified incorrectly and it's just kind of something I wanted to clarify. So this over here is Caladium lindenii. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's definitely one of my favorite plants. This here is also known as Xanthosoma lindenii or Caladium magnificum. And one thing I really wanted to say is I see this plant just all the time classified incorrectly online. And I think a lot of people think that they're buying a different plant, but they end up with this one, and they didn't get what they wanted. So one thing I've seen online a lot is I've seen it be compared to or being marketed as Philodendron Birkin. So for reference, this is Philodendron Birkin. I don't think they look at all similar, but just if you see Philodendron Birkin, this here is what you're buying. You're not buying Caladium lindenii. So this here is a native. Oh, I also see people call this Philodendron gloriosum. I've seen it labeled as Philodendron varicosum, which is a very different plant. This one's not velvety at all. It's actually quite matte and very flat in texture. So it behaves a lot like an alocasia, in my opinion. It has a spreading habit, so it doesn't really climb. If you put this up on a moss pole, it won't really get tall. It just kind of clumps. And I'll show you what I mean here. It produces little pups and offshoots, and then you can divide it that way. The bottom of the leaves are also really super beautiful. It's got this really nice saggitate shape to it, so it's arrowhead shaped. When they start off kind of oval shaped, like this one leaf here, and then they build those, I like to call them elbows or shoulders of the leaf as they mature. The mature height of this guy is about 3 feet or so. Mature spread can be even larger. They can get a lot larger than I think a lot of people give them credit for. It's native to the Darien Gap, which is in between Colombia and Panama, and some of the submountainous areas there. This plant definitely isn't as picky as a Calathea or Calathea as far as humidity goes, but it will get crispy tips on you if you keep it in an area that is too dry. I had a little bit of that here because I forgot to I forgot to mist it for a couple of days. So just something to be mindful of. This plant does not like cool temperatures, is one thing I've noticed. It gets a little sad, it gets a little duller, and it sort of loses some of that marking if you keep it in too cold temperatures. So I think 20 degrees or so Celsius, sorry, really not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, is perfect for this plant. Another thing I want to say is it's a pretty heavy feeder. In my opinion, this will be the best plant for you if you give it a very frequent but very low dosage feedings. So what I do is I use Schultz brand liquid feed fertilizer every time I water with this plant, and only a couple of drops and it seems to be really happy. The growing season's very random. I've noticed this plant doesn't really, for me at least, it doesn't really have a very distinct growing season. It just kind of pushes growth whenever it wants. That's what the new leaves look like when they're unfurling, and they just get bigger and better with each leaf, which is nice. I highly recommend raising the humidity when the leaves first come out, because that just lets them unfurl properly and then you don't get little cracks and the leaves are very well formed. This plant here is just a really good investment plant, I think. It propagates incredibly easily, and on top of that, it's not picky about soil either. I've seen people grow this in leca. I've seen people grow it in coco coir. I'm personally just growing it in regular potting mix, and it just does fine for me. I don't know if you guys can see all the light coming. It's a very sunny day today. So yeah, Caladium lindenii, Magnificum is the cultivar. It's named after a Belgian botanist. It's native to Colombia. It's in the Aroids family. It likes temperatures to be a little bit warm, more on the warm side, and it definitely is a heavy feeder in my personal opinion. I've also noticed in my personal opinion that this does not like being in terracotta pots because it dries out way too quickly. Sorry, I got like a little bit of like glare. I don't know how that's going to turn out. Just bear with me. If you notice that your variegation is not as strong and not as pronounced, I highly recommend putting it in a shadier location. This plant definitely likes being in more of an indirect light than any direct sunlight. It'll turn kind of a really bright, vibrant neon green if it has too much light, and it'll go a little paler, I find, too. Another thing I really want to say about this plant is it doesn't like cold drafts. I had it a little bit too close to the window one day, and it definitely wilted a little bit. It actually turned a little bit almost like a purple-brown color on the under margins. So just another thing to be mindful of. This plant, in comparison to a lot of my other aroids, is not very susceptible, in my personal experience, to spider mites. So if you have a spider mite problem, I think this one might be a good addition rather than getting one of those more heavily prone to philodendrons or aroids. So maybe don't start off with like a varicosum or like a philodendron micans, for example. I think those ones are a lot more susceptible to lots of pests. So this one's a very beginner-friendly plant, and it's such a showstopper too. Another thing I want to say is they like being a little bit pot-bound. I do not repot this very frequently. It's actually in a... I think I have two of these, but this particular plant right here is in its original nursery pot. So yeah, they like being a little bit pot-bound. Another thing, and I think this might be the last thing I want to say, is don't be alarmed if it has little brown dots right on the petioles there. That's perfectly normal. That's just a characteristic of this plant and how it grows. I really feel like I'm missing something. I gotta think. This plant has been tissue cultured a lot, so if you're at like a wholesale plant market, or if you're at like a nursery, excuse me, I don't think you should be paying triple digits for this plant. It's just so overly circulated right now because there's quite a demand for it in the market, and I think it'll be saturated pretty soon. So if you're getting charged three figures, like $150, for example, for this plant, unless you're in a super tight market or if you're in a super isolated, secluded area, I think you're probably not getting a very good deal. So just something to be mindful of. You can probably find these for cheaper online. I recommend huddling it close to your other plants too, just to raise the humidity, because this guy does appreciate a little bit higher humidity. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. If you have it in an area that's too shorter, it kind of gets, or sorry, that's too, I'm missing my words today. If you have it in an area that's too shady, you'll notice that it gets a little etiolated. It'll grow a little long and leggy and kind of gangly looking. So if you want a really compact size, I highly recommend just diffused light. I think that's your best bet. The leaves will crisp up if you have too low humidity. When I first got this plant, I kind of had that, so that's a good learning experience. If you notice that the veins themselves are going yellow, usually that's because you have too hard chemistry tap water and the chlorine's kind of chloraticizing it. This plant, you know what? Overall, you're going to have a lot of fun with this plant. I think it's generally easy care, especially if you're into aroids, which I obviously am. It's a great gift plant. Just be cautious on the watering and the fertilizing. Rinse it out every once in a while if you do fertilize every single water, because you don't want to build up salts and like fertilizer in the soil, because then it can burn the roots. I do not recommend water propagating for this plant. Always either sphagnum moss or cocoa coir or just regular potting mix, because from what I've noticed, I tried to divide my other one and it did not do well in water propagation. They rot very easily, so another thing to be mindful of. Yeah, so I hope you guys all have a really wonderful, beautiful day. Thank you for being here. I thought I could, I hope I taught you something new. This is definitely a wonderful plant to get acquainted with, especially if you're more of a beginner, because it's just such a showstopper and it grows so fast, and it's just beautiful. So this here is Caladium magnificum, Caladium lindenii magnificum, or Xanthosoma magnificum, or Xanthosoma lindenii. So it has lots of different names, but certainly not philodendron birkin. I can't say that enough. This here is philodendron birkin. It's so different. So make sure you're buying what you think you're buying. and be careful with those high prices because some people do price gouge plants. So yeah, have a wonderful day, stay blessed, and I'll see you guys soon.